want to add to a discussion that's already going on, and maybe also make this part 4 of my testimony. My testimony is complete in its current form. It's on a playlist on my channel. It's a 3-part series, but here I want to add a little bit of detail that's missing. And simultaneously answer a question that ChristoferL posed and to further this discussion on those that were converted in a Hellfire and Brimstone way. He basically asks those of you that have experienced that, please elaborate on it, help him to understand that. In some ways this will disappoint because I was not converted in that way, but I have a similar thread or theme flowing from that message that really kind of opened my eyes and made me do some real deep soul searching, and ultimately the acceptance of Christ came through that. I tend to read fiction and nonfiction simultaneously, and I tend to exclusively, at least now at this particular point in my life, read Christian-themed fiction and nonfiction. At the point that I was searching, I was reading all kinds of fiction and nonfiction, and but at this particular point I was reading the Left Behind series in conjunction with The Case for Christ. The Case for Christ is ultimately where I place most of my credit to helping me to understand and realize who Christ really is, and that there is an overwhelming and logical reason for not only believing in the historical character of Christ, but that he was who he claimed to be. So you kind of have that as a foundation for me. And then as I'm reading Left Behind, side note on that, there's some theological or doctrinal issues I have with that book now, but at the time I was really reading it at its face value, and considering, if this event were to happen right now, would I be one that had been raptured, or would I be one that was left behind? And in that way there's a similarity to the Hellfire and Brimstone conversion, because someone is supposed to listen to a message like that and ask themselves, well, if today was Judgment Day, would I be in heaven or hell? I came to the realization, with being brutally honest with myself, that I identified all too well with the characters in the book that were left behind, and that more than likely I would have been left behind on that day. And like Peter, who had walked with Christ for 3 years and saw him do miracles and had all this knowledge of Christ, I had been in the church quite a bit through my childhood, and I had all this knowledge. I had read all of his miracles. For the most part, I understood the message, but I denied him. So the story about Peter denying Christ, even though it incenses you, and you're just like, you want to call Peter names, because it's like, how do you not get it? You were literally walking with this man for 3 years, and yet you denied him. But that's exactly what I came to the knowledge of, and it was maybe spurred by this whole question of where I would be on the day that God designated was the last day. But ultimately what had to happen, and I think this is ultimately where the messages, the warning messages, I'll call them, because not every preacher does a Hellfire and Brimstone presentation and is in your face and he's yelling and he's angry and overly passionate. But the common thread that I talked about at the beginning of this is that at some point a person comes to the full knowledge of the depths of their own depravity. See, the problem with me and most people, I believe, before they come to Christ, is that they're deluded into thinking that they're standing on firm, solid, safe ground, not knowing that all this time they've been floating out in this oceanic abyss, and they're in desperate need of a life raft or a life preserver. And it's only when those scales fall from your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, that's who I really am, and all of a sudden you see that you're in this ocean and you're in desperate need of rescue, that you cling to that life preserver, and immediately thankfully, even though you just went through kind of a negative experience, understanding just how rotten you are, you immediately are overwhelmed with joy in the abundance and the love of Christ. And that is where I am motivated to share my experience with others. Not so that I can sit here and pick all these little logs and things out of other people's eyes and just rail on them about how horrible they are, but so they can experience that immediate and overwhelming and abundant joy of being rescued. I don't want to be on this life raft alone. I want friends, family, and even perfect strangers to have the same exact opportunity, because who am I but just another guy that was fortunate enough to search and search and search and finally find He that saves.